show has to go on. It don't matter if you're stopped up or not. The title of today's study is, might seem weird to you, but yeah, it might be weird, but the title is called When Dancing Becomes Deadly. Now, there's nothing wrong with dancing. My wife and myself dance sometimes together. There's actually, David danced to the Lord. Now the key word is in the Lord. But today's subject is called When Dancing Becomes Deadly. Now why are we talking about dancing? Well, did anybody in here watch the NFL Superbowl last week? Who watched it? You? Did anybody watch the halftime show? Did anybody watch Jennifer Lopez's part of the halftime show? Okay, we got some. Well, my primary, what I'm talking about today is what happened during Jennifer Lopez's halftime show. Now, there are two different views among the world and even professing Christians. Those two views are, well, there was nothing wrong with what she did. We see that all the time. What's the big deal? You Bible thumpers need to you're being judgmental. Just be quiet. Now the other view is that what Jennifer Lopez represented in her dance was anti-biblical, and the message was anti-biblical, the message that she was portraying. And basically in my study today, I want to show that there was three different parts to J-Lo's part that she did. There was a part 1, a part 2, and a part 3. So I'll talk a little bit about all those parts and why I believe they gave the wrong message. Now here's a question I'd like to ask you. Who would you like teaching your young men and women about sex? Would you like Bible teachers teaching them about it, or would you rather the world teach them about it? That should be an obvious answer to every professing Christian. Why, of course, we want them to learn about sex from the Bible and what God has to say about it. By the way, God has a whole lot to say about sex. He did invent it, by the way. God did. He invented it. And it was not just for procreation or having children. That's not all it was about. If you will remember, when you read the Old Testament, what happened when God told Sarah when she was 90 years old, "You're going to have a baby, Sarah." What was Sarah's response? Does anybody remember what her reply was to God?
She laughed within herself.
Yeah, that was one. But here's what she said. "Shall I have pleasure in my old age?" So sex is not just about having kids. Now we may have been taught that, but God has a lot to say. Now here's the problem. Historically, the church has remained silent on this particular issue. Now, if the church refuses to teach our children about sexual issues, what's the other alternative? Satan and his crowd will be teaching them. And that's the problem, folks. Now, the result of that, what's the result of the church not teaching about these issues but allowing the world to do it? What's the result of that? We can see them in real life statistics. The divorce rate amongst professing Christians is as high as those that are lost. The divorce rate is over 50% now from professing Christians. So what's happening is these young Christians are going into a marriage with the wrong ideas about what sex is about. Okay? Now, what's that got to do with Jennifer Lopez and the halftime NFL Super Bowl show? Well, I'll tell you if you'll just hang on. Just hold on. We're going to get to that. So, we've already talked about the two different reactions. And I'm in the camp that says, no, this is wrong. This is not what we should be showing our children. Now, those that would say, well, we see this all the time. What's the big deal? And they're right about that. We do see this all the time. But here's the difference when you're watching an NFL Super Bowl. The whole family is there with you, including the little ones and those that are learning about these issues, which would not maybe be there in a regular scenario. You see what I'm saying? The whole family's gathered in to watch Super Bowl, and they are subjected to this from Jennifer Lopez. Now, what is this that I'm talking about? I'm going to get specific, okay? And then we will go to the Bible. In Matthew 14 is where our lesson will come from today. Now, there were two groups of people watching the Super Bowl, men and women, and we'll disregard children for right now. Now, let me talk a little bit about this before I go any farther. Men and women, when we learn about biblical sex, we will learn that men and women are created differently by God. And you women know this and you men know this, but I'm going to remind us, men are physical. They go by what they see. That's why when a man's wife looks beautiful to him, that will have a reaction to him. But women are primarily emotional while men are primarily physical. Now you've got men watching J-Lo and you've got women watching J-Lo, and it's totally understandable that women would see what Jennifer Lopez did at the halftime show and say, oh, her makeup is so beautiful tonight. Her hair is looking so good. She's making such graceful moves. But the men's reaction, ladies, would be totally different. The men's reaction, because it involved the movements and what was used as props, the men's reaction would be exactly the reaction they would have if they went to a strip club. That would be the reaction for men. Because men are physical, when a man sees the shape of a woman's body, and that would include his wife, God has wired men so that they have a switch that is instantly on, and it's not just part of the way on, like those light dimmers, you can turn them low or high. When a man switches on, it's wide open when it comes to sexuality. Now, here's the thing. God made us that way. God created women to be primarily emotional, but He created men to be primarily physical. If that were not the case, folks, there would never be any children. There has to be some desire between a man and a woman for procreation to happen. So God made it that way. In other words, God created sex, but we've ruined it. The world I'm talking about. So let me make that point before we go any farther. Men watching what Jennifer Lopez did and women watching it created two different reactions. So let's go a little bit farther now, and let's talk about there were three different parts to Jennifer Lopez's presentation during the halftime show. There was part 1, part 2, and part 3. Now, if you watched it, what was the first thing that happened? She climbed up the pole And then she slid back down the pole, and what did she do? She sat down and she spread her legs open and her hand went down to her crotch area. Now, you and I are adults and we know exactly what that symbolizes, don't we? Now, I watched it. I didn't watch the Super Bowl or the halftime, but I went and watched the halftime show in her part just so that I would know. And in the first part of J-Lo's presentation, her hand went to the same area 6 different times, I counted. So the first misrepresentation that Jennifer Lopez is giving that's anti-biblical is the sexual part. And what Satan wants man and women to do, men and women, is to bypass the male-female relationship. And that, what she was representing there, represents the wrong idea of what sex is. Now let's go to part 2. What happened in part 2 of Jennifer Lopez's presentation? She went to the top of the pole. There were 3 poles. There were one here, and one in the middle. And Jennifer was in the middle one. Okay? She climbed up to the top of the pole and she did this. Now what does that represent? And while she was doing this, there were about 30 or 40 people that were prostrate. In other words, they were bowed down at the foot of that. Now, what does that represent to us as Christians? Worship. So the first part of Jennifer Lopez's presentation was sexual in nature. It misrepresented sex. The second part was spiritual in nature. And I've looked on the internet and I've not seen an explanation from Jennifer Lopez as to why she did that. So I can assume that she did that as a form of worship. People worshiping her. In other words, taking the place of Christ. Christ to the Christian is the only one to be worshipped. Not a person. So what Jennifer Lopez did in the second movement of her presentation was Antichrist. Now, anti, we've studied this before, can mean 2 different things. It can mean against or to opposing, or it can mean instead of Christ. So what Jennifer Lopez was doing, she was presenting herself there to be worshipped instead of Christ. There's no mistake, folks. When you got 40 people bowed and a person up on the cross like this, the only reaction, the only conclusion we can have is they're symbolizing worship. That's the only thing, that's the only logical conclusion I can come to. Now, the third part of the presentation was political. She made a political statement. Why do I say that? There were these cages with children in them all over the place. And Jennifer Lopez even said, she implied that that was a statement against our president putting children in cages at the border. So it was sexual, it was spiritual, and it was political. So for those that... So what can we learn from Jennifer Lopez's halftime presentation and her dancing, which was erotic, by the way? In the second part, she had a nude colored bodysuit on, and she was on a pole moving around in these erotic movements. So a man watching that the reaction from the man would be exactly the same as if he went down to the strip joint and watched a stripper. The reaction in a man's brain, the physiological reaction, would have been the same. So Jennifer Lopez wanted to be objectified during the halftime show as a stripper on a pole. Now, our children in America and the world watched that. And now, what idea about sex are they getting from that? They're getting the idea that a woman is only to be objectified as a sexual object, and that's it. And that's why we have so many men that have the wrong idea and they mistreat women. They've objectified women. And when you do that as a woman, you are furthering that objectification of women. Now, the three things that we've learned that I wrote down, that when you are dancing in an erotic fashion, it's never innocent. There's always a message to be implied. It's always purposeful. There's always a purpose to it. And it's sometimes deadly, as our study will show today. Let's go to Matthew chapter 14 now and look at our study. And I want to bring out some points, and then I want to do a comparison with what happened with Jennifer Lopez's presentation to what we learned from our study today, okay? Keep in mind as we study this that men are primarily physical, and folks, if we believe that a woman has to be scantily clad to turn a man on, it don't have to happen. All a man has to see is the shape of a woman's body, and he's instantly turned on. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing if we do it God's way, but it's a bad thing if we do it the world's way, okay? So let's go and let's read our study, and I want to comment on it as we go along. Now, it starts out, at that time Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, this is John the Baptist, he is risen from the dead. So obviously Herod, because of his pagan religions, believed in reincarnation. Now this actually caused King Herod to become excited at the prospect that John the Baptist may have risen from the dead. And I'll comment further on that as we go. And therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Now this gives us a clue that King Herod had witnessed John the Baptist doing great things for the Lord. He witnessed him doing good work for the Lord, good causes. He probably knew that John the Baptist loved people, but there was one thing that got John the Baptist in trouble. And it's the same thing that gets the man of God in trouble with the world today. You know, anybody want to guess what that is? What's the one thing that will get the Bible preacher and the teacher in trouble quicker than anything? Yeah, pointing out sins of the world. Now, let's read verse 3. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison. Now, I don't want you to skip over this. For Herodias' sake. His brother Philip's wife. Now here, when we read this scripture, we know we can infer some things from this scripture. King Herod had an affair with his own brother's wife, and now his own brother's wife, even though they were not divorced, was living with King Herod. Sounds about like some messes people get themselves in today, don't it? Y'all know any families that they're so messed up because they didn't do it God's way? I know that. It's in my family and it's probably in yours or has been. So if we don't do it God's way, we get in some very bad messes. And that would include sex, by the way, what we're talking about today. So, now, it was because of Herodias that John the Baptist was in prison. Now, King Herod just wanted to hold him in jail. He didn't want to kill him. It was because of Herodias that she was probably demanding that he be executed. But King Herod was holding off on that because, frankly, folks, he had a high regard for John the Baptist, even though John the Baptist went to his face and pointed out, what you're doing is not right. But not Herodias. Not Herodias. She reacted negatively to the sin. For John said unto him, verse 4, it is not lawful for thee to have her. Now here's what happened, folks. Now we've been told by the world and even some professing Christians, don't you judge people. You Christians, you just go to church for a couple hours a week, but when you're around us, you just be quiet and you just do your little thing while you're at church. But if you're around us, we don't want any judging. And we're even told by professing Christians that the only thing we're to do to the world is love them. Well, of course we're to love the world and want to get people saved. But at the same time, we're to expose the sinful and the anti-biblical and anti-godly behavior of the world. And that's what John the Baptist was doing. We can do both, by the way. But to hear some Christians talk, if you love people, that precludes or excludes you from pointing out their sin. They believe that if you point out sinful behavior in people, you're not being loving or kind. That if you try to warn people, that's unloving. Let's apply that logic to a mother and a child for a moment. If a child is run out the door and is headed to the busy highway, and the mother runs out and grabs it and says, don't you know that if you keep on, you're going to get killed? My question is that a loving thing for a mother to do or an unloving thing? It's loving. But for some reason, the world believes that a Christian warning people is unloving. That's a tactic by Satan to get Christians to shut up and go away. I promise you that's what that is. It's an intimidation tactic. Now, here's what happened. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. Now here is a mother, and an evil mother, by the way. Here is a mother that has vitriolic hatred for the man of God for simply pointing out sin. This lady had become John the Baptist's enemy because he said what you did was wrong. Now most people would stop at that, but not Herodias. Herodias hated John the Baptist so much that she is going to be determined that she's not going to stop until he's dead. So she hatches a plan. A fail-safe plan that, by the way, includes exotic dancing. Now, how is it that exotic dancing being in an evil plan would be sure to work and have the desired effect. Because Herodias knew what Jennifer Lopez knows. That if a woman dances around scantily clad in front of a man making erotic moves, that's going to turn the man on and he's going to offer the woman something. Now at a strip club, they pony up the money when that happens. And men give hundreds and thousands of dollars to a woman that does what Jennifer Lopez did at the halftime show. But here, when King Herod saw this from Herodias' daughter, which would have been his own niece, folks, it was his brother Philip's daughter, his own niece. Now this woman had his own niece dance erotically in front of her uncle. Wow. Think about that. Now it wasn't innocent. We said it wasn't innocent. It had a purpose, and sometimes deadly. We're going to see the part here. So the plan worked perfectly. The young girl danced in front of her uncle in an erotic fashion. It turned him on. And in front of all of his buddies, he said, I'll give you whatsoever you want. Whatever you want, I'll give. And they knew, Herodias knew right then that John the Baptist's head would be on a platter. So dancing erotically was used to kill the most influential prophet of God that ever walked the earth. Jesus said there's none greater than John the Baptist. So erotic dancing got the greatest man aside from Jesus on the earth killed. So to those that say, why, there's no danger in that, it's harmless, we say, you're wrong, there is. Here's a story that proves it. So, erotic dancing is never innocent. It always has a purpose, and it's sometimes deadly. I'm sure that there are stories of erotic dancers at strip joints getting hooked up with the wrong people, and it causes their lives to end. Some of them go from that into prostitution, and when you do that, you're putting yourself in a world that your life is in danger. So there's a direct correlation between it. Now, let's read the rest of the scripture here. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, notice this, being before instructed of her mother, so this was planned out to the T, and it worked perfectly. Give me here John Baptist's head in the charger. And the king was sorry. This tells us he didn't want John the Baptist to die. But the evil mother did. And she knew what would get the job done. She knew that if this young girl danced erotically, I don't know if she had any clothes on or not. I don't know. She may or may not have. But imagine this, folks. This would be like one of my nieces coming and dancing, like doing a striptease for me. Wow. Are you kidding me? This happened, and here's a Bible story about it, folks. This is reality. And the consequences of this, look what happened. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. So immediately they went and killed him, cut his head off. Now here, it didn't end there. The evil mother was not content with the man just being killed. They wanted his head brought to her. And there's no doubt in my mind that when John the Baptist's head was brought to this evil mother, that she laughed. A maniacal, devilish, satanic laugh. So is erotic dancing innocent? Never. Does erotic dancing have a purpose? Yes, always. It had a purpose here, and it had a purpose in the halftime performance from Jennifer Lopez. Remember, I said the first part was sexual, the second part was spiritual, and the third part was political. Now, here's the thing. If you were to go up to Jennifer Lopez today and say, "Oh, Jennifer, that was such a wonderful performance. You were so beautiful. And the good thing about it is, Jennifer, there was absolutely no purpose or symbolism in what you did." Do you know what would happen? Jennifer Lopez would be disappointed. Because there was a purpose in statements that she made during the halftime show. At least, and she said so about the third part, the cages. She even said there was a purpose in it. It's to show that it's not right to put children in cages at the border. So there was a purpose in it. Actually, I was watching some sports commentators after the halftime show, and I remember this quote from one of the hosts. He said about Jennifer Lopez, her hustler came out. So men got it. Men understood the message of the pole and acting like a stripper. It's a no-brainer, folks. The reaction from men watching would have been exactly the same as if they went to a strip club. So they got it. And Jennifer Lopez got it because there was a purpose in the reason she did it. But the only people that seemed to not have gotten it was a vast number of Christians today. They didn't get it. Now the result of us not getting it and refusing to teach our children about sexual issues is that we've handed it over to Satan and his crowd. And the results are horrible. We have marriages that don't last or breaking up. We have young men getting the wrong idea about sexual issues. I was a young man in that category. Let me just end with this. When I was young, when it was spring break and you got out of school, summer break, I helped my uncle in backer. Tobacco. But we call it backer. B-A-K-K-R. No, I'm just kidding, y'all. But my uncle was a sexual deviant. At any opportunity he could, he would have sex with neighbors' wives. And I was around that. He did the booty calls when young or not young ladies came walking by. And I was subjected to that as a young boy, but I was there helping my uncle in tobacco. And that was the teaching I got from that. Nobody in my church said, "Young people, young men and women, we want to teach you what God says about these issues." So the only other alternative was I learned them from my family. And that's the way it's been passed down, and the result is horrible. We're allowing the world and the powers of darkness, that's what it calls it in Ephesians 6, to teach our children about things as important as sex. And we're just sitting back and not caring. It's time we start. So, a recoup. a recoup. Erotic dancing is never innocent. It always has a purpose, and it's sometimes deadly. That's the three things I want you to get from this. Jennifer Lopez's performance had three parts. The first part was sexual. There were 6 different times that her hand went to her crotch. We all know what that means. 6 times in about 2 minutes. The second part, she climbed a pole and did this while people were bowing at the foot of it, and there were 2 more beside it. That's a representation of Calvary. So she was allowing herself to be worshipped in the second part. It was spiritual. The third part was political, with the children in the cages. And the statement was, I hate our president. I don't like our president for what he's done. So, folks, it's time we develop discerning spirits and we oppose what the Bible opposes. So this study will be online if you have anyone you want to see it.